All right, well, welcome to another episode of Traveling Through History. Really happy you're here with us tonight. We're talking about a special episode for myself and for the Pope family. We're going to be talking about all of our famous ancestors coming out of the Pope family. These are ancestors that my father has been able to largely confirm through his research of the last 5 to 6 years, and he's been really the resident historian in our family for a long time. You've seen him on this program before when we talked about genealogy in general. And tonight we're going to be talking about our famous ancestors that we're actually related to. So how you doing, Dad?
Okay, and you're right. It's sort of my passion in retirement.
Absolutely, yep. And he claims he doesn't spend enough time on it every single day, and his wife claims he spends way too much time on it. So,
Yeah, that's true.
so that's a lot of fun.
She says I'm obsessed, and I always say no, but the answer is yes, she's right. I am.
So you told us about this on the last time you were on the program, but what is it that you love about ancestry research? I know you love the puzzle aspect of it.
Yeah, well, to go back just a few seconds, I was building. I'm not claiming that I started all of this. My both grandfathers were working on this 80 years ago. Of course, there was no internet or anything like that. My father continued on the Pope side. Your grandfather continued on the Pope side. In those days, you had to go to county courthouses and churches and cemeteries and that kind of thing way before the internet. And a lot of letters to a genealogist in England. They'd take a couple of weeks to get over there, and then they'd do some research, and then a few more weeks to get back. It was a laborious process, and now it's just wonderful. It doesn't mean that the internet is always right. And you have to be super careful. But I had a very solid foundation for both my father's side and my mother's side to do. And the one that I've spent more time on is the Pope family, and I've gone at many generations. And as I told you, because you're going to be taking it over at some point, is that there's so many millions of people doing it, and so many different ways of checking that that the odds are that you can get it right. And also, I'm lucky because I have a fantastic, and you've met her over the internet, Sally Cray, a fantastic genealogist, and she's helped me get out of rabbit holes and steer down the right pike many a time. And so,
she's been on this program twice, and want to definitely do a call out to Sally. She's really taught us a lot about genealogy. So
yeah, she's really good. We're very lucky. And so when the pandemic hit 5 years ago, all of my activities, which were many, all stopped. Everything just shut down. And so I had all this material tucked away in boxes, and I pulled it out and started building a couple of trees using their foundation. And once I got beyond where they had been able to go, both grandfathers, I kept going and made some big mistakes and had to take a lot of people out. But with Sally, I've gotten down and we found some amazing people, many, not all of the people I had hoped to find, but some amazing people we're going to talk about tonight.
That's right. That's absolutely right. You talk about how difficult it was for, your father, your grandfather, driving around to courthouses, looking at marriage licenses, looking at death certificates, doing research the old-fashioned way, sending letters to England and waiting for 3 months for a return letter. So how much easier is it today with Ancestry.com, with all the internet resources you have?
Oh, light years easier. You don't have to go out to Salt Lake City, Utah to look at what the Mormons, Latter-day Saints have. They're the greatest genealogists in the world, and they've got probably billions of records. You don't have to do all of those things. What you do have to do, though, and I urge everybody not to repeat my mistakes, is don't accept anything. Verify. I started because I built the trees on Ancestry.com, which I still feel are the best trees, but Ancestry gives hints of what other people have what other people have put as the next generation, the father of so and so. And in the very beginning, I was just blithely saying, wow, that's great. And I'd put that person in, and then the next person, next person. But there are people out there, most not, but there are people out there who will just say, oh, this guy's probably my ancestor, and I'll put him in. You can't,
especially if they're nobility, right? Everybody wants to lean towards nobility.
Especially the little example I always use with you and others is you get out to Thomas Jones, a number of generations out, and one is Sir Thomas Jones, and the other is just Farmer Thomas Jones. And somebody will looking at that will say, well, of course, we're descended from Sir Thomas Jones. And then they'll keep going, and then they'll build on that, and could well be wrong. It might have been Farmer Thomas Jones,
right?
And so you can't assume that other people are right. But with Sally's help, I'm pretty confident in most of it. I've no doubt in my mind that in both of those big trees that there's some mistakes still in there, but most of it's been weeded out, I think.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the illegitimate children, the illegitimate parents? How do you work around those problems? Because those would be roadblocks as well, where you think it's one sibling, but it's really the other, or you think it's one of the daughters and it's really the other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, if you're pretty sure it's one or the other, you can make a mistake, but they have the same father and mother. Mm-hmm. And so you're still generally on the right track. And all the illegitimate children, Charlemagne, for example, who you're going to talk about, had at least 18 children. Mm-hmm. And all of these, most of these major figures had not only more than one wife, because the women often died very early. They might be 32 or 33 and have had 10 children and die in childbirth. And the man would marry again, and maybe marry a third time, and at the same time have mistresses,
right?
And sometimes they claimed their illegitimate children, and the illegitimate children would play big roles as military commanders for their father, etc. And then it's easier to follow.
Like William the Conqueror.
Yes.
Was not really,
and others, and many others.
Right. It's really fascinating. I've really enjoyed having you teach me about this whole world that I didn't know much about. So it's been fun.
You were asking why it's so addictive. My sister, your aunt, Rebecca, has said, because she's interested in it too, and she has said for a long time, it's like a puzzle. It's like a mystery, almost like solving a murder mystery or something like that, trying to sort these out. And farther back you go, often there's not very many records, and there are all kinds of confusing claims. So and so was the father of this person. No, it was of this other person, and it's really taxing. And it's sort of like older people, retired people like me. Some of them do crossword puzzles to try to keep the brain active, and this is I just have sometimes I have to concentrate so hard. You get down to we're going to talk about William Marshall, for example. William Marshall had 9 children, 5 sons, none of whom had children, 4 daughters, all of whom had children, and we were descended from all 4 of those daughters. And trying to keep that straight is really mind-blowing. And I've devised a device that helps me, and we'll see it in the presentation.
Right. And one thing, I was just there a couple of weeks ago for your birthday, and you showed me your filing system, and it's pretty sophisticated, all the printouts that you do. Have you gotten to the point where you started thinking about maybe not printing everything out all the time? Because
I don't print
eventually you're going to have to move out.
Yeah, or get thrown out.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I printed a lot more in the early days, and now I don't print so much anymore. Most of what you saw had been done more in the early days of my being in this. I don't print so much anymore.
So one of the things Dad has been delighting us with as a family since COVID is a email chain that he's put together for all of us, and he calls it Bits and Pieces. So tell us about how that came about, and we all look forward to all your bits and pieces because it's always some either crazy ancestor that we have or very interesting one.
I've actually got two chains going. One is for ancestors who are important enough and worthy of a whole bio themselves, which will be 1 or 2 pages maximum by themselves. And then the other is what I call bits and pieces, where somebody is of interest and I want to let the family know about it, having found him or her, but somebody who has a bio bit, not a full several pages.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do both. And the bits and pieces have been a lot of fun because I can put in people I don't have a huge amount of information, but I know they did something. Found for example, the English mathematician who invented the symbol for infinity, which looks like an 8 on its side.
Right.
And I'm joking because I joked with my sister, your aunt, because she and I are both terrible in mathematics. And I joked with her about that must be where our mathematical genius came from. So I didn't have a lot on him, but
Right.
it's fun to put 4 or 5 ancestors in bits and pieces. I've done 34 of them so far. I'm working on 35, hundreds of people.
And some of the ladies that you have in our chain have become so fascinating. We'll talk about Mabel the Poisoner, but there have been some other ones that have just been absolutely fascinating and total characters. So it's been a lot of fun to track.
Some are characters, some were incredibly brave. Some were incredibly brave, defended as very young women, oversaw a defense of their castle against a siege when the husband, the lord, was out somewhere and the siege appeared out of nowhere and she's directing the defense of the castle. There's some very brave, or even got on horseback and led the charge of
Right.
Of her troops. There have been some amazing women.
So we have a couple of Joan of Arcs in our ancestors.
Yes. None burned, but
None burned.
but at least one hanged that we know of, and quite a few beheaded.
So before we go into the presentation, I just wanted to have you qualify for us that some of these folks, although incredibly impressive, we have this many ancestors that are famous. Some of them, there's many people that have the same ancestor.
Billions.
So maybe you can talk about why that is, why William the Conqueror or Charlemagne or others
Well, first of all,
related to so many people.
First of all, they lived so far back.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlemagne, way back, first of all. So if he had any children, if he even had one, and that child married and had a family, eventually there'd be a lot of people because it doubles every generation. But most of these major leaders, like Charlemagne or William the Conqueror, had mistresses and lots of children, and so the numbers are huge. And people talk about, oh, he goes all the way back to Charlemagne, but millions of people. It's not that we're so special that we go back to Charlemagne when no one else does. There are millions of descendants from these.
And the fact that he had 18 children also is part of it as well, right? I mean, they had so many kids.
Of course. Yeah. So even in the early generations, they had huge numbers, and then it doubles. It goes down and down. There's just millions.
Absolutely.
When you get to our time.
So how many sources do you check when you find a famous person? Let's say you came upon, Edward the First, or you came upon Harold Godwinson. How many sources do you go to really validate that person?
Anyone, all of them that I can find. The Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, of course, are they're globally known, but Ancestry, you can't rely on any one of them. But as Sally says, our genealogist, even ones that aren't necessarily known for perfect reliability, you can use that suggestion as a guide to get started to try to find it. But as many as I can find, usually at least 5 or 6. And if they all agree, I'll tend to go ahead with it. And then
She talks about,
I ask her to check it from time to time too.
right. She talks about the suggestion. She also talks about the brick walls and ways to get around them.
Yes.
And I know that you don't have infinite time to work on this stuff. So some of the later trees, when they get really deep into history, you kind of run into brick walls. There's just no material available.
No, that's right. Just especially the fathers of the women. The fathers of the men tend to go way, way, way back. And the fathers of the parents, father and mother of some of the women are just unknown. And some of the women have no last name. We don't know their last name because they were much less documented than the males.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But yeah, sure. Every one of these lines of the hundreds and hundreds of lines ends somewhere.
So I know you've always been absolutely fascinated with the medieval period, and most of our ancestors we're going to look at tonight are in the medieval period. When I started this channel, I spent most of my time American Revolution, Civil War, more recent stuff, World War II. But my last 4 out of my last 6 episodes have been in the medieval period, and I'm really getting absolutely fascinated by it. I just can't get enough of it. So the fact that we're doing this episode tonight really dovetails with a lot of those new episodes I have. So.
And a lot of things that happened back then changed the course of history. Mm-hmm. William the Conqueror, 1066.
Right.
It was an earthquake.
It was.
The Anglo-Saxons, as you said in one of your podcasts, the Anglo-Saxons moved in and pushed the native Britons west and north, but that was over 500 years. Mm-hmm. The Normans, that was just an earthquake.
It was. What a fascinating thing.
Changed.
And more of the TV shows and movies that have been coming out are focusing on that period. We talked about The Last Kingdom. We talked about The Vikings, which is a great show. A lot of these shows are really trying to cover that medieval period. So it is fascinating. King Arthur.
England is what it is today because of these different. Mm-hmm. Who knows if the Anglo-Saxons hadn't come over that period of time, or if William the Conqueror had lost. Mm-hmm. Who knows what England would be, and therefore what we would be, because our family is heavily English. As you know, Pope is an English name.
And you and other historians love to postulate and think about and theorize what it would have been like if Stamford Bridge hadn't happened, and if Harold Godwinson and his troops had come fresh to the battle at Hastings. Would have been an interesting situation.
You never know, but you can speculate.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, let's go ahead and get into our ancestors. Here we go. You can see some pictures of all of our great ancestors Dad has been uncovering through all his great research. The furthest back we're going to be talking about tonight is 742 AD. As you can see, Charlemagne down there on the bottom left is the first one we're going to talk about, and a lot of the other great ones we're going to talk about in this episode tonight, all with interesting histories individually. So has there been any particular one or two, Dad, that has been the most fascinating for you?
No, I wouldn't say any one. Every day I'm finding somebody who's interesting, even if not famous and well known. Charlemagne is certainly up there because he really, really changed Europe, both when he was alive and how he divided it. So he was certainly one of the most interesting.
No question. And really amazing if you think about it. I know there's many people that are related to these famous people, but the fact that we are related to so many of them really is pretty astounding to me.
Well, because they intermarried. Mm-hmm. All of the aristocracy intermarried. And so they were a lot of them were related to each other as well.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, let's talk about Charlemagne. He's the first one out of the gate. The uniter of Europe, the king of the Franks, the emperor of Romans. So he really held all those different titles. Also known as Charles the Great. And he was a Frankish king who lived from 742 to 814 AD. And as Dad said, he significantly expanded his kingdom through military conquest through much of Western and Central Europe. And he was born in those late 740s period, kind of at the beginning of the Middle Ages. Charlemagne was son of Pepin the Short, king of the Franks. And upon his father's death in 768, kingdom was divided between Charlemagne and his brother Carloman, which is kind of interesting to me, Dad, that they wanted to try to avoid that power struggle. And then 3 years later, after Carloman died, Charlemagne became sole ruler of the Franks and took over the entire kingdom. Spent much of his reign engaged in military campaigns, trying to expand his kingdom and consolidate power. Conquered the Lombards in Italy, the Saxons in central Germany, parts of Spain against the Moors. Also fought against the Avars in modern-day Hungary, adding to his empire there. And in 800, which was many years later, 29 years later or so, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans, which was a title that signified revival of the Western Roman Empire. And this was a very significant event in European history. So thoughts about Charlemagne from your perspective?
Well, he really dominated what became Europe and unified a lot. You'll see that all the way through the presentation about unifying. When you get to Alfred, for example, you will see that trying to unify as opposed to hundreds of little princedoms and little kingdoms, they call petty kingdoms. But as almost as much as his life was his after him, because his grandsons ended up dividing into two major parts of Europe, and that was West Francia and East Francia. And East Francia became essentially what's now Germany, and West Francia became what's basically France. And so his influence was still coming down then, and it set the stage for the development of Europe as we know it, all the way back in the 8th century.
The fact that he unified essentially all of the western part of the Roman Empire, which was absolutely humongous.
Yes.
You're talking about Spain and France and Germany and Hungary,
Correct.
Yugoslavia, Italy, all of it, Romania, Poland, all those portions of his empire were all there. So you're absolutely right. He was essentially the emperor of the western portion of the Roman Empire.
That's correct.
Really incredible. Whereas
and there's so many people who do genealogy who would love to get back to Charlemagne. Of course, I hope that we would get there. There's no guarantee. You never know until suddenly you come on somebody who so-and-so was the granddaughter of Charlemagne, then you got it.
So you've had a couple of huge scores in doing all this work the last 5 years. This had to have been one of the biggest.
It was one of the very biggest.
For Charlemagne, for sure. So tell us how we're related to him.
Well, coming out of me, I'm the first person in the tree, and going on up. Eventually, I'd mentioned earlier this system that I devised, and I don't know whether anyone else would use such a system, but for me, I saw so many people who had noted that their distant ancestor was the GGGGGG or GGGGGGF, great grandfather, or I mean GGM, grandmother, and it was just too confusing to me, and I devised this numbering system, and he's all 43. He's 42 generations out from me.
And what's amazing is he's 10 generations from William the Conqueror, who's 33. So that's really incredible. He's so much further back.
He is. Yeah. And but when you get back to that, it's pretty well documented if you can get to somebody like that, up to a certain point, who his ancestors were. And then of course it stops at some point. But these were the these were the ancestors of him. And then, of course, if you looked from him down to us, it would be absolutely enormous. You couldn't have a screen big enough.
What do you have, about 7,000 people in the tree now?
About 6,000.
Okay.
That's only because I split. Most people have not done it. Most people do the tree from themselves, and then there's the father on the top and the mother below, and then it goes out to thousands of people in both. I split those because as I knew they were both going to be so big, and that some of the people who might be interested in my mother's side of the family, her family is from Albemarle County, Virginia. Some of them might be interested in that part of the tree, but the other tree would be the whole tree. If I unified it, would be so huge that I decided to split it into my father's side and my mother's side. But even with the father's side, it's 6,000 now, and I don't know what it'll be when I turn it over to you.
And it's safe to say Charlemagne was much more famous than his father, who was also king of the Franks.
Yes, that's true. But and he really started the Carolingian dynasty, one of the great dynasties, because his Latin name was Carolus, and that's where Carolingian comes from. And there were a number of great dynasties before more modern day Europe, and that certainly the Carolingian dynasty was huge.
And dominant for many, many generations.
Yes, many.
So the first episode we had you on, we talked about genealogy. The second episode, you were actually out of the country, but we had Sally Cray and David Pope. And we talked about DNA and about taking DNA tests to get even more information about your tree. And when you did your ancestry DNA test or any other tests you've done, what percentage were we English? What percentage were we Scottish? What percentage were we French? Do you remember what that mix was?
I don't remember exact percentages, but it has changed as Ancestry, for example, or Family Tree, as they have refined their procedures. And I assumed we were primarily English, and of course, if you're English, you also French. You also have some Scandinavian, etc. But and German, because my grandmother, your great grandmother, was from German stock.
Right.
But what has absolutely astonished me as I got into it was the Scots. I had no idea we had any Scottish ancestry, and it's something up to like 35% now. The last time I saw it,
We should probably take a test before next summer's trip to Scotland to see what our exact percentage is.
Yeah, I've got it. I have it somewhere. I didn't know you were going to ask. Didn't know you were going to ask for it. I've got it somewhere, but it's astonishing. It's mostly. I always thought we were primarily English, and I still think we are. But the percentage of Scots is astonishing.
Wow, that's great. And you have a funny story about the Scots. We'll talk about that when we get to one of the ancestors. Yeah.
Yes.
So our next one is a very fascinating guy. This is Rollo, and he was a Viking chieftain and founder of Normandy. And there's a depiction of what they think he might have looked like. He was a real tough guy. He was a Viking chieftain born sometime between 835 and 870 AD. He was recognized for founding the Duchy of Normandy in present-day France. And he was known as Rollo the Walker in Old Norse. So due to his imposing size, reportedly too large to fit comfortably on a horse, and his frequent travels on foot, Rollo was skilled in both warfare and diplomacy. So he's a really great leader. His exact birthplace was uncertain, but likely located somewhere in Scandinavia. And as you know, we just took a great trip to Norway, and we saw a statue there to him in one of their squares there in Ålesund, Norway, and they claim him as one of their own. So he rose to prominence during the Viking raids of the 9th and 10th centuries, led a Viking fleet estimated to be around 700 ships. So if you can just imagine what that looked like coming in. And besieged Paris for 13 months, nearly starving the city into submission. Finally, in 911, Rollo negotiated the Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Epte with the Frankish king Charles the Simple, and he received control of the lower Seine Valley in exchange for ending his raids and defending the region from other Viking incursions. And he kind of changed over to start working with Charles directly. As part of this agreement, Rollo and his followers converted to Christianity, which I thought was really interesting, from their more pagan beliefs. He also took the baptismal name Robert at this time. And this was a real turning point as he transitioned from a raiding chieftain to a ruler, establishing the Duchy of Normandy. So thoughts about Rollo and his history and what our connection to him is.
Well, the first of all, you know that you see in there about Charles the Simple. As I mentioned, the grandsons of Charlemagne split into East Francia and West Francia, and Charles was the king of West Francia. But Rollo and others just basically moved in, and they were good fighters, and they took over that northern section of. In addition to the besieging that you talked about, they just moved in and just settled and took it over, and Charles the Simple wasn't powerful enough to really do anything about it.
He
And
saw the writing on the wall, essentially. The only way he was
exactly,
going
and
to
so
make
he
Rollo go away.
basically made a deal with Rollo and his followers, and I have found several of his major followers in the tree as well. Basically, okay, you can have that section up there around the city of Rouen, and in exchange for uh, for converting to Christianity. But that was really, probably, I'm sure in Rollo's mind, that was a very minor point. The major point was Rollo turned around and was protecting West Francia from the other Vikings. That was the deal. You can have that land and I'll leave you alone if you turn around and protect us from the other Vikings. So that was the deal.
Right. Yeah, really fascinating. I wonder what that transition was like for him to go from kind of warrior raider to ruler. I mean, that's not the same thing. It's a very different type of thing. So
Well,
must have been interesting.
he was already a chieftain of some kind.
Hmm.
He was already a leader and all of that, and he wasn't really a ruler. It was only his grandson who eventually became the Duke of Normandy.
Right.
Neither Rollo nor his son William Longsword was actually ever the Duke of Normandy. Rollo and his son were both the Count of Rouen. And
Yes.
they're called Duke of Normandy, but in fact they never really were officially. They were the rulers. I mean, they ran the show,
So his
Charles the
grandson
Simple.
was and his great grandson were both duke, but he was not. So that's a good point.
That's right.
Hmm.
So he was a great warrior, and he and his people just moved in and took it. And
Absolutely.
Charles the Simple couldn't do anything about it, but he made a pretty decent deal
You did,
to get, because they were capable of protecting and fighting back against the other Vikings.
for sure. Really interesting. So let's talk about his tree. You can see him up there on the very top right, the princeps. That's Rollo there, and then you have
Yeah,
his son and his grandson, who eventually became Duke of Normandy, and then all the way down to, of course, William the Conqueror.
exactly. And that's where, and the thing about, we'll talk about William in a minute, but the thing is, they were still really, they were still Frenchified Vikings. They were still really Vikings at heart, pretty far down into this. And that's why they were called Normans. They were still, by the time William Conqueror, they were more or less French, but they still had a lot of Viking blood and spirit in them.
Yeah, apparently he brought on several translators for the first 10 years he was ruler because he didn't know French and he had to learn French, and all his men had to learn French.
Yes, that's right.
So they had to bring translators. There's the statue I was talking about, Dad, that we saw in Olesund, where they very proudly proclaim Rollo as one of their own, as a Norwegian Viking
Yeah,
ruler.
yeah. Your slide says he probably was born in Scandinavia.
Yes.
I'm 100% sure. It might have been Denmark, but I think Norway is probably a good bet.
Hmm.
They're probably right in
Right.
Olesund.
Anything else you want to mention about the Rollo tree and those couple of generations?
Not really. It's just, again, something that ended up having a major impact. That's why the reason you've chosen, I think, most of these people, the earliest ones at least, had major impacts on
Right.
the whole fact that this group of Vikings came down, settled, and gradually became French, and that eventually resulted in William the Conqueror, who changed history. It's a continuum all the way down.
And just calling out, we looked at Charlemagne, he was at 43 in Dad's system. So he was 43 or 42 generations back from Dad. And you see here, Rollo is in 2 different generations, both 38 and 34. So maybe you can explain why some of these people have multiple numbers next to them.
Yeah, multiple numbers in my system, because we're descended, as I mentioned earlier, about like from William Marshall, we're descended from 4 of his daughters. And we're descended from, if I've done this all correctly, from 2 of the offspring of Rollo and his wife, Papa of Bayeux, if correct. And 33 generations out from me, I found the first of his 2 children were descended from. There were more than 2, and 38 generations, I found the other one. Even though it's complicated, even though they're the same generation because they were siblings. It took 33 generations to get to one and 37 generations to get to the other.
And part of the reason that happens, and you can see if you go 2 generations down from Rollo, we have a count to is related to us in 4 different ways. But you explain it that the reason that happens is because you have some people that have kids at very old ages and some that have them very young ages.
Yes.
And essentially can be in different generations, although they're really the son or grandson of the ancestor.
Yes, that's right. And that, like I mentioned earlier, can be confusing. It's stressful trying to keep it straight, but it's also challenging, and it's good exercise.
For sure.
It's always easier, of course, when we're descended from one generation.
Absolutely.
One generation is much easier to understand.
So our next one you've already mentioned, Alfred the Great. He was the king of Wessex and repeller of Vikings. He lived from 847 to 899 AD and was king of Wessex from 871 to 899, so a full 28 years as king. And he's renowned for successfully defending the kingdom against Viking invasions, which was happening all the time during the Anglo-Saxon period. He also promoted education and legal reform, so he's actually a very good administrator. And he laid the foundation for a unified England. So he really was putting together and assembling a way for all of England to be united under one kingdom rather than multiple kingdoms that had been before. So when he was born, it was very unlikely that he would become king since he had 4 older brothers. So it was really unlikely that he was going to ascend to the throne, but he did. And he really probably would have been a scholar otherwise because he was very interested in English poetry and in learning Latin. He did 2 visits to Rome in 853 and 855. And then he took over as king unexpectedly in early 878 when the Danes, led by King Guthrum, seized Chippenham in Wiltshire in a lightning strike and used it as a secure base from which to devastate Wessex. So all of a sudden they had this huge problem on their hands with the Danes invading. So with only his royal bodyguard, a small army, and his followers, he actually allied with his ally in Somerset. Alfred withdrew to Somerset's tidal marshes, in which he had probably hunted as a youth. So he was kind of like on the run in a way. And he reassessed his strategy and adopted some of the Danes' tactics by building a fortified base in Somerset's marshes and summoned a mobile army of men from Wiltshire. And he eventually pursued the Danes in a guerrilla warfare campaign, which was successful. And in May 878, they defeated the Danes at the Battle of Addictive, which was a big deal in reclaiming the area for them. So thoughts about Alfred, why he was the great, and how he was able to kind of reconstitute himself here.
Well, he's great for many reasons, but that you right at the bottom when you talk about the Battle of Addictive, that changed the history of England, because up to then, Wessex was the kingdom. What's now England was divided into a number of kingdoms, including, excuse me, sorry, and Mercia, Wessex, his kingdom, Mercia, and others, Northumbria.
Sussex, yeah.
Yes, and um, and Alfred had this idea of uniting all of that into something that he called Angloland, which didn't happen till long after him, but he had the idea of it and he wanted to do it. And I'm sure it looked like a hopeless possibility when he was hiding out in the marshes, because the Danes controlled most of much of what the rest of what is now England was controlled by the Danes. They had this era, the Dane law was called, and it seemed like overwhelming, sort of like our at the beginning of our revolution, when our irregulars facing the greatest army in the world. It was sort of like that. But this defeat of the Danes at Eddington really changed everything, because he began to move forward from that, showed they could be defeated, and he began to move forward and slowly push them north out of the neighboring kingdoms. And
one of the reasons he and the other kings had been talking about this idea of England was also just out of protection, because they had been dealing with these Viking raids for many, many generations. And at some point, instead of fighting each other, Wessex against Sussex or Northumbria, they started putting alliances together to fight against the Vikings.
But you don't want to over dramatize these things. But I mentioned on several occasions about key points in history, key things like William the Conqueror's 1066 that stand out. And this is not so well known, Battle of Eddington, like 1066 Hastings. But if he had lost, been killed, and his people had been wiped out in the marshes of Somerset, and they had also taken Wessex, we might be speaking Danish today, because because they had almost all of what is now England. And it's only because he defeated them there and began pushing them farther east and north that it turned out like it did. And he deserves the epithet, the Great.
Yes. And he was on the throne for so long, so he had a huge impact.
That too.
So big deal in terms of organizing England. So talk to us about how we're related to him.
Well, again, tracing out, hoping he was one of the great ancestors I hope to find. No guarantee, but I did. And he comes from a long line of kings of Wessex, but that was only a modest part of what later became England, southwest. He married his ancestors also married princesses of the neighboring kingdom, Mercia, which was really the dominant kingdom for a while.
Yeah, you'll notice on this tree that you've got Wessex on one side and Mercia on the other, and then you also have a Kent relative there as well. So it seems like all the kingdoms were kind of intermarrying at that time.
Well, they did exactly what they did, partly to keep all the spoils in the family, but also for strengthening. Most of those marriages back then were occasionally one for love, but mostly they were strategic. The two fathers told them, "You will be married," because they wanted to join kingdoms or principalities.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I wonder what he would have thought if he could have seen his vision of a united England actually come true many years later.
Yeah, he would have been thrilled, I'm sure, but long after his time. But he really, because he survived in the marshes and came forward, he really got it started.
I don't know if he would have been thrilled about the Norman invasion, but who knows?
No.
Probably not.
No, because he was Anglo-Saxon, of course.
That's right. Very interesting stuff. Let's talk about Uhtred the Bold of Bamberg. And there's a great picture of him in the really famous TV show, The Last Kingdom, which we've already mentioned. He was an Anglo-Saxon nobleman and ealdorman of Northumbria, born in 970 and died in 1016. He was also known as Uhtred the Bold and was a powerful Anglo-Saxon nobleman who ruled Bamberg and served as ealdorman of Northumbria from 1006.
Essentially an earl.
An earl, right, to 1016. And he's known for his military prowess, his role in defending Northumbria against Viking incursions. So you can see a real theme here for a lot of these generations. Essentially, Vikings just kept coming and kept coming. And that was a big part of their history, is fending them off. So some details of his life are shrouded in historical ambiguity. He was a significant figure in the history of the region and the subject of the historical fiction series, The Last Kingdom. And again, that's a picture of him there in that show. Uhtred was a member of the Idwulfingas family, who had ruled Bamberg and the surrounding area for over a century. His father, Walthorf I, was also ruler of Bamberg. Uhtred became ealdorman in Northumbria in 1006, a position of great power and responsibility. His death was described in the text as de obsession d'unelmi, which indicates that he was assassinated, potentially marking the beginning of a blood feud. There was another Uhtred who was the son of Eadwulf I, who also ruled Bamberg, and to distinguish between the two of them, Uhtred the Bold is often referred to as such. So I thought that was really interesting that you have to distinguish between the two Uhtred's. Uhtred made a strategic marriage to solidify his position, including one with Siege, daughter of Styr, to gain support from the Danes in Dira. So thoughts about Uhtred the Bold, what was true, what was fiction, as we take a look at this really interesting figure.
Well, it's true that that Bamberg, which still exists to this day, a massive castle in what's Northumbria, up in the northeast of England, which has been ruled by Danes, Scots, England, back and forth, back and forth. Bamberg still exists, and in fact is one of the great. The castle is one of the great tourist attractions up in that area, up in Northumbria. He was real, and I was thrilled to find him too. And I had read Bernard Cornwell's series of books. There are 13 books about Uhtred of Bebbanburg, basically based on the real Uhtred, who I was so thrilled to find in the tree. It's not. He lived actually 100 years after Alfred.
Yeah, they smashed the two of them together in the show.
Yeah, in the book,
yeah.
The author Bernard Cornwell took the liberty of moving him up 100 years, or back 100 years, I should say, and he was a principal reason as a warrior that Alfred in the books by Bernard Cornwell, The Last Kingdom, was able to push out of Wessex and begin to push the Danes north. And I just thought it was fun to find the real Uhtred, even though he lived 100 years later and it was fictionalized, but he was a real ruler and a real tough guy. He wasn't a king, but he was essentially the Earl of Northumbria.
And he was a serious warrior. I mean, that really
Very
was
serious.
true.
Very serious.
Do we know any more about this assassination that apparently happened to him and why that would have happened?
I could have looked at it. I don't remember exactly the details of it.
Okay.
But that was so common that they were all killing each other in battle or assassinating, poisoning, ambushing. It was very violent back in those times.
And then why do you think that he took the license and liberty to merge these two very fascinating stories, one of Alfred 100 years plus earlier, and then Uhtred? Didn't really have to do that, but I guess Uhtred is a very compelling character.
So Uhtred's such a great, because these books were not primarily about Alfred. He was in it, but it was about Uhtred of Bebbanburg, fictional character based on our real ancestor. And he was so fabulous, fantastic a warrior that Bernard Cornwell took literary license, which he is, of course, absolutely entitled to do as a fiction writer, and moved him into this series of books.
Well, I'll tell you, my son Ashton loved this series. He and his wife both loved it, and Uhtred is one of his favorite characters. When he found out we were related to the character that this character is based on, he was just thrilled. So
yes, I was happy too, because I had read all those books, and they're they're in the category of you can't put them down or you stay up way too late reading them.
right.
He's a
So
great writer.
Let's talk about this tree here with Uhtred and how we're related to him.
Well, it's, as you can see, it's we're getting a little bit closer to us. We're still a long way out. We're still 1,000 years ago. But Bamberg was a major holdout in against the Scots when they tried to come down and take Northumbria, against the Vikings, against everybody who wanted to take Northumbria, and so this, of course, if we follow this tree going toward us, it would be huge. But this just gives a little bit idea about what we know of his ancestors.
It's interesting. You see Bernicia here, you see Northumbria, you see Bamberg, you see all these very famous places.
Yes.
That I assume you can still visit most of them today.
Certainly Bamberg. It's I think the major one. No, not the major. That's probably Edinburgh Castle, but it's in that area, in that region, it's one of the major tourist sites. Bamberg Castle, which still exists, and it's huge. But this just gives you an idea. I haven't gone very far past him.
We also see a Bishop of Durham here, which I assume was a pretty important person too.
Oh, bishops were extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
But you see that Egfrida, they didn't, first of all, they didn't have names like Uhtred of Bebbanburg, or so-and-so of Bamberg, or so-and-so of Northumbria, or so-and-so of Wessex.
They didn't have last names. I mean, even William the Conqueror was William the Conqueror because they just didn't have last names, or it wasn't a big part of the fabric of society.
Yeah. And you see that Egfrida, and I just put a little symbol in there that we have no last name for her, but we know her name at least.
So has that been incredibly frustrating through the whole tree to have all these women that have no last names? It's really hard to track them, right?
Yeah, it's hard. I wouldn't say it's incredibly frustrating. It's just the way it is, because the women weren't counted as usually some were, but most were not counted as important and weren't documented the way the men were. It's just how it was.
Right. Fascinating. So our next one is Hugh Capet. He was the king of France, leader of the Capetian dynasty. He was born 938, died October 14th, 996. So he was 58 years old. He died in Paris, and it was king of France from 987 to 996, about 9 years. He was the first of a direct line of 14 Capetian kings, so it became a real dynasty. And this dynasty derived its name from his nickname, which was Capet or Kappa, which means cape in Latin. Hugh was the eldest son of Hugh the Great, who was Duke of the Franks. On his father's death in 956, he inherited vast estates in the regions of Paris and Orleans and extended to some places south of the Loire River. He thus became one of the most powerful vassals in the kingdom and serious rival to the Carolingian king Lothar. And of course, we talked about that other dynasty as well. Hugh married.
Just to interject there, the Carolingian dynasty started with Charlemagne.
Yes.
Carolus, and that's where Carolingian, and as most dynasties did, over time it got weaker and weaker toward the end.
Absolutely. And this is interesting, Dad, that you talked about most of them didn't have last names, and this one did. He actually had a last name, so I don't know if that
but
helps.
It wasn't a name; it was it was like
part of his dynasty,
like Thorkel the Tall.
Yes.
Hugh Capet, Hugh who wears the cape.
Yes.
It
Yes.
became a name, but not
Mhm.
at his time.
Not at that time. Yeah. So he married Adeline. So he married Adelaide, who was daughter of William III, Duke of Aquitaine, in 970. But his efforts to extend his influence into the southwestern kingdom were unsuccessful. From 978 to 986, Hugh was allied with the German emperors Otto II and Otto III, and with Adalbero, who was Archbishop of Reims, in political intrigues against the Carolingian king. And by 985, Hugh was actually the ruler in all but title. And after a brief reign of Lothar's son Louis V, Hugh was elected King of France in May of 987 by the Assembly of Frankish magnates. And you and I talked a little bit about this off camera, how interesting it was that he was actually elected, and that obviously it was probably a very small circle of people, and it was kind of a foregone conclusion. But
it was unanimous, I'm sure.
But the fact that they had this whole concept of election is really kind of interesting.
Yeah, but this is important because this is the end of a major dynasty, the Carolingian dynasty.
Yes.
He was, in essence, something like the prime minister, but in fact, he was ruling. He ran everything because the Carolingian king had become so weak that couldn't really control anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so after the brief reign of 1 year reign of Louis V, Hugh was basically took over the actual title that he had been exercising in all but name.
So he was like prime minister, or maybe like regent, almost like something.
No,
like
not regent. No, regent was generally when the successor was a child,
mm-hmm.
or when the king was away, somebody was like on the Crusades, somebody
Mm-hmm.
would be regent. No, he was something like running the government, but in
Okay.
fact he was the de facto ruler,
Mm-hmm.
and then his descendants all the way down, as long as the Capetian dynasty existed, were actual kings.
And then his center of power was primarily in Paris and the surrounding regions.
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. So yes, the end of the Carolingian line of kings was there, and that was a very substantial milestone in the history of France, I assume.
Again, that's the exact reason that you chose these people, is because they
Right.
is in the earliest ones, the older ones like this, were milestones in one way or another.
Correct. So let's talk about how Hugh is related to us.
Well, as you can see there, we are getting closer. He, for example, we're descended from two of his children, and I'm sorry. No, Hugh Capet is up at the top. Apologies.
Yes, Capet is up at the top.
He's one of those ones, lucky ones, for me, who was only we're descended from one child, and that makes it so much easier. But his son, for example, were descended twice, and his
Yes.
son twice, and his son twice, and fortunately, their son only once. But an interesting, very interesting thing, this was an astonishing, I had no idea. I was really floored when all of a sudden I realized we're related to Ukrainians. And I'd never known that. And of course, my father and both grandfathers had no idea in the world, because his grandson, they recognized back then that there was too much intermarriage within a small circle in Europe, and they were beginning to have a lot of defects. And he was advised to reach out farther, and he reached.
So that's why you have the Kiev group here on the bottom of the
Exactly.
screen.
He reached out to Kievan Rus, which is basically now Ukraine, to bring in Anne of Kiev.
Interesting.
And that brought into the European royalty They were royalty of their own. They were her father was the Grand Prince of Kiev and Rus,
Yes.
operating out of Kiev, which is today the capital of Ukraine.
How do you
And
think that, how do you
Hmm?
think that they knew? How do you think they knew that if they were so inbred that they needed to go outside? How do you think they knew that back then?
Well, because it was physically obvious, especially in the Spanish kings. They had these long jaws and all kinds of illnesses, and I don't know who figured out. I'm sure it wasn't the king, but it was figured out that they needed to change the bloodline,
Yes.
and they went way afield to Kiev and Rus to bring Anne of Kiev in, and that changed our tree hugely and brought in fascinating uh, groups of tribes and things that I honestly admit I'd never even heard of.
Very interesting that he married into the family of the Duke of Aquitaine too. I think that was very strategic on his part
Oh, of course,
to
of course,
consolidate. Yeah.
of course, they were always doing that, and there was very little love. It was all strategic, where the fathers said, "You will get married,"
Hmm.
to unite these two kingdoms or principalities or duchies.
Really interesting.
And these brought in some very interesting people, including some Swedes and tribes and groups that I'd never heard of, like the Oberites. And that's
Hmm.
been one, I told you, that's been one of the fascinating things, and you will love it when you get into it, is reading about new tribes and battles and things that you've never even heard of, much less can remember.
Hmm. There are
And
also some Swedes in this lower tree
and
as
there are
well.
some Swedes in this
Yeah.
too.
Hmm.
They're Swedes in other ways because it's England and you have Scandinavians,
Right.
but the Swedes tend of the Scandinavians, the Norwegians and the Danes tended to go west to England, what's now England and Ireland, and the Swedes tended to go east down the rivers, and they went all the way to Constantinople.
This lower one, you had a king of Sweden and a wife from Iceland, which is really interesting.
No, no,
Is that not what it
no,
said?
no. What it says is per the Icelandic sagas,
Oh, okay.
his wife, the king of Sweden's wife, was so and so, per the Icelandic sagas.
Got
And
it.
when I have something like that in parentheses, that means it may or may not be. The sagas say it was so and so, whatever her name was.
Interesting. So our next one is Harold Godwinson. He was an Anglo-Saxon king of England, also known as Harold II. He was a member of the most powerful noble family in England. His father Godwin having been made Earl of Wessex by Canute the Great. Harold also served previously as Earl of East Anglia, was appointed to his father's earldom on Godwin's death. And after his brother-in-law, King Edward the Confessor, died without an heir on January 5th of 1066, there was a group that convened that chose Harold to succeed him because there was no heir, which is a really interesting way to ascend to the throne. He was the first English monarch to be crowned in Westminster Abbey, which I think is really interesting. And of course, across the seas, there was William the Conqueror, who was putting together an invasion force because he felt like he deserved the crown that had been promised it by Edward. So in late September, he defeated an invasion by rival claimant Harald Hardrada of Norway in the Battle of Stamford Bridge near York, which was a really bloody battle. And then right after that was over, he marched his army back south to meet William at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Just 2 weeks later, where he was killed in action and where they were defeated. And of course, the Normans then took over. Harold was the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, and William kicked off the Norman period of rule in England. So, thoughts about Harold Godwinson, his very short reign. Was he really a legitimate king? Did he have heir to the throne?
Well, there was no legitimate king since there was no heir to the throne. That's why the Council of Elders had to choose somebody because Edward was never clear. He not only didn't have an heir, but he was never clear because William insisted. William had visited him some years before, William, Duke of Normandy, who became William the Conqueror, and came away from that, insisting that Edward said he would be the king after Edward died. And there are various reports, but some people claim that Harold never really wanted to do this, but they were so prominent, and they didn't want a French king. The Godwinson, Harold Godwinson, and his line were so prominent that he was the appropriate person. So,
and the elders probably didn't want a French king either. So
that's who I'm talking about. The elders didn't want a French king, and so he was chosen, and he I think it's impossible to know what kind of king he would have been over the long run, but the Stamford Bridge doesn't get much history, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, because only 2-3 weeks later you had Hastings in 1066, October of 1066. But this was very important because this was really considered, Stamford Bridge, the defeat of the Vikings. And Harold Hardrada, who many historians consider the last great Viking, and some people say that Stamford Bridge was the end of the Viking era.
Mm-hmm.
And they were defeated like this. Harold was killed. Godwinson's brother was on Harold's side.
Because as we know, the Vikings had been invading for 300 years up to this point, right? And they had been constantly a problem.
And they were, and some Vikings came after that too. But this was really, if Hastings had never happened, this would be an earthquake, because it really was the end of the major Viking era, the last of the great Vikings. Harold Hardrada was actually killed at this battle, and Harold and his army were victorious in driving the Vikings out and killing Harold Hardrada.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have been another sort of an earthquake if 1066, if Hastings hadn't happened.
2 weeks later, which is pretty incredible. When you think about that, he essentially had 2 weeks of celebration, and then he was right into his death, unfortunately.
I don't think there was any celebration, because he was aware of the preparations. They knew about the preparations for the invasion. Not sure they knew the exact day or exact place, but and he was already marching his army south after this battle in order to meet the invasion if it took place, which he believed it would.
So one of the things you and Sally both talk about in looking at this research when it comes to Godwinson, of course, they didn't have last names back then. So he was Godwinson because he was the son of Godwin, which was his father. So how do you try to use that as a tool when you're doing your research, or daughter when it's a daughter?
I mean, it tells you right there what the father's first name was. Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge help. So you know who Harold's father was named Godwin.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Scandinavian, of course, because they were all Vikings, really, or had Viking influence. I mean, he was Anglo-Saxon, but they all had Viking influence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Canute, of course, was a great Viking king before he took over England. He's the only other king besides Alfred who was called the Great, and the only two, I believe, who were ever called the Great. And something like that, Godwin's son or Thor's son or whatever, is a help, because it gives you the name of you can narrow it down, the name of the father.
And then is there ever like a Godwin daughter or something like that when it's a daughter? Do you ever see those kind of names?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like so-and-so's daughter, Dottir or Dotter. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I just figured that I wanted to mention that as a really helpful tool for you guys to
Yes, it is.
keep working from, generation to generation.
Yes, it is helpful.
So let's talk about how Harold Godwinson is related to us.
Well, interesting, because as you will see the next slide, we're related to both sides of this conflict, because I traced back. Where is Harold? He's 31. His father was never king, but he was a major player.
He was
32.
Earl of Wessex. Yep.
Yes, 32 generations out. And Harold was not hereditary king. He was chosen. But you can see, for example, below his father, Godwin, was married to Thorkel's daughter.
Yes. Was he
And
that?
so you already know her father's first name.
Right.
So
It's
he was Thorkel Sprackling. You see that?
I see that. And then Godwinson's son was Harold's son because he was the son of Harold. So
That's right, Harold's
makes
son,
sense.
exactly.
Yep.
So we're again from grandfather Pope going out and out and out and out. I found a granddaughter of Harold, and then his son, and then Harold.
And this is a really good example of how much you filled in and then how much you still have to try to find. You can see here Harold's son,
Sure.
wife is not traceable at this point.
Not at this point. I couldn't find it.
And the other thing I want to mention is you also put in queen consort versus queen. And I know you
Yes.
try to make that distinction.
Yes, Queen. There weren't very many queens of England. Most famous was Elizabeth I. She was the ruler,
Right.
but the wife of the king was not the ruler. She was queen consort.
Yes.
So she was queen of England, but not the ruling queen.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense.
That's the difference. I tried to put that in where I could. I just anything that would clarify.
Well, let's talk about maybe the most famous person in our line other than Charlemagne, and that's William the Conqueror, who's the great, great, great grandson of Rollo, who we talked about earlier. You see a really good depiction of him there with his crown. He was born in 1028. He was the Duke of Normandy, who famously led the Norman conquest of England in 1066 at Hastings, defeating King Harold II, or Harold Godwinson, at the Battle of Hastings. And he was crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day. And he significantly reshaped English society and governance, and really, in a lot of ways, was a shockwave across all of Europe. He, in the end, was an illegitimate son of Robert I, Duke of Normandy, and Herleva of Falaise. He inherited the Duchy of Normandy at the age of 7, navigating a very turbulent period with rebellions and political intrigue. His claim to the English throne was based on a perceived promise by King Edward the Confessor, who did not have an heir, and an oath allegedly sworn by Harold Godwinson. William's invasion of England in 1066 was a meticulously planned operation, utilizing a large fleet and army. The decisive Battle of Hastings resulted in the death of King Harold and the beginning of the Norman rule. William's reign was characterized by the consolidation of power through military campaigns, castle building, and land redistribution. He also had, of course, the Domesday Book, which was completed in 1086, 20 years after Hastings, and it provided a detailed inventory of England's wealth and resources and land and taxation administration. He introduced Norman language, customs, and legal systems, influencing the development of English society for centuries. And really, in a lot of ways, Dad, we're still dealing with this huge earthquake that happened.
Earthquake is almost an understatement. It changed everything. And as you and I were talking about, there are a lot of people, including me, who think that this would not have happened except for the Battle of Stamford Bridge. because
Hmm.
Harold's army lost a lot of people, and they were tired, and didn't have time to prepare uh, after their march south to prepare proper defenses. But if that battle had never happened and they had never lost uh, all those people and hadn't had to have that march, there are serious historians who think that Harold's army could have thrown William's invaders back into the sea.
Yes,
Again, one of those things we'll never know.
we'll
But
never know.
William was William was absolutely determined because he believed that Edward the Confessor, because he visited England, and he visited several years before that. He visited Edward the Confessor, and he came away saying that, Edward promised me that I would be the next king.
Right,
And he also claimed that Harold Godwinson had given him an oath that he would support him as king, that he had given William an oath. And
right.
so when the elders chose Harold to succeed Edward the Confessor, William was outraged and was absolutely determined. And he pulled Normandy behind him, and they won the battle.
It's true.
And it changed everything. They didn't even speak English.
And you know, Dad, as much of an earthquake as 1066 was, and it was, I think almost more impressive was those 20 years from 1066 to 1086, where he and his men consolidated power and took control of the entire countryside through force and through politics and through administration and putting in new courts and all the different things they did to really solidify Norman rule. I think in some ways that was almost more impressive, the way that
He
they were
did
such
it.
good
He did it
administrators.
via force, because
Yes,
he had controlled the South, which he did pretty soon. He then tried to go forward to control the rest of the country. And a lot of the farther north was still Anglo-Saxon, and they were resisting. They wanted
right.
nothing to do with the Normans. And the campaign to subdue the North was called the Harrying of the North.
Yes,
He built major castles. He took land away from the Anglo-Saxon barons and gave it to people who had come over with him and fought alongside him.
right.
And also, their court procedures. I don't mean law court. I mean the court, the royal court. They brought in 10,000 words or more into the English language, and so many that we take for granted, like bureau.
And they brought the Norman way of doing administration and of
Exactly,
government and of courts.
exactly,
The courts were Norman.
exactly. And eventually,
So
the Old English language, and which was really more Germanic, and French melded into what is now English.
yes, that's
So
right.
it was, earthquake hardly describes it.
One of the other names on my mother's side is Worsley. And when you look at Worsley, there was a De Workus Lee that
Yes.
was one of his right-hand men when he came over in Hastings in 1066. And so, you know, there's people on my mother's side of the family that were also related through the people that he brought across from France. So really interesting stuff.
Yes, it is. And it really changed everything. And England is totally different than what it would have been um, if the Anglo-Saxons had continued to rule. They'd already ruled for 500 years. And if they had continued, who knows what England would be like now, or what we'd be like.
And
Since,
the language we speak, English, that is the dominant language of the entire world, was largely formed by the Normans and his administration
well, not just
in
by them, but
in mixing with
it happened as the two merged
yes,
over time, because their administration was using French. The
right.
administration was in French, but it was with the people over time, as the Normans merged in with the Anglo-Saxons, the
But even simple
language
things,
changed.
even simple things like in the Doomsday Book in 1086 and beyond after that, simple things like the Normans always signed documents and contracts. And the British before him did not. Everything was a handshake or a promise or an oral agreement. So they brought in a lot of structure that
Yes.
the old British did not have, and
True.
really created a lot of what our Western society is today.
True.
Yeah.
So he's very, very consequential.
Let's talk about how we're related to him.
Well, he comes, of course, down from Rollo.
Yes.
And down, it's impossible to know exactly how he felt in his mind, but I think they were still part Viking even back then. They were good fighters and they were tough guys. And if you don't have to go back very far, but till you find they really were Vikings. And by the time he came in, he was illegitimate. They called him William the Bastard.
That's right.
And by the time he came in, Normandy was pretty consolidated, but it hadn't been that long. It hadn't been that long. And again, it was one of these things where, of course, everybody who does genealogy is hoping to find William the Conqueror, but you never know. And I kept going and going out 30-some generations, and all of a sudden there he was.
And you said there was something like 20 million Americans or maybe Westerners who have William the Conqueror as an ancestor. Is that correct?
It's hard to say. He had large numbers. I was trying to find it, as a matter of fact, before this, and I never could find anything accurate. But the historians agree that there are large numbers of people in the world, and especially in France, England, and America, descended from William.
And then he was married into a family that was royalty from Flanders. And I noted that a lot of the family was either Belgian or Dutch or people from that region.
Yes.
So
correct.
we must obviously have some Belgian and some Dutch in our background as well.
Absolutely so. Flanders was essentially what's now Belgium.
Right. So another marriage for power and consolidation, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, really fascinating. And of course, this was the mother lode when you're Ancestry.com and genealogist to be able to connect that William the Conqueror connection that you.
Yeah, he had sons. He had very important dispute between the two sons, and what he did was the older son was Robert. They divided. He gave him Normandy, and the second son, William Rufus, gave him England, and he became William II. And they were really at odds all the time. And then there was a younger son, Henry, who wasn't supposed to become king because he was a younger son. But William Rufus, William II of England, was killed in a quote unquote hunting accident. And again, there are a lot of historians who are very skeptical that it was an accident. And his younger brother, Henry, turned around and rode to London and proclaimed himself king, and was a major, powerful for a king. And we're descended from him 5 times.
Right.
Very confusing, but 5
So
times.
I will drop into the description down below a couple of the links to some of my episodes I did, one on William the Conqueror, one on the Anglo-Saxon kings, so everybody can watch those if they'd like. One of the things I didn't realize until I did all the research was that William spent very little time in England. He really spent a majority of his time in Normandy and would just come over to England when he thought it was necessary. So he ended up ruling England largely with governors and regents that were in place for him. And he would spend much of his time over in Normandy, which I thought was very interesting.
Correct. It wasn't the only one.
Yeah. And so he had to have a really good, tight administration from that perspective as well, because he just wasn't around a lot.
Correct.
Oh.